And then let's generate our motivation. And really think amongst all the suffering in this world. May we generate genuine love and compassion, wanting others to be free of suffering and to have happiness, no matter who they are. And through having that motivation, then may we then act in the world to be of benefit to living beings, including helping them along the spiritual path to full awakening. And so let this be our motivation for sharing the day together. Okay, so we've been reading from this book, An Open-Hearted Life, for many weeks now. And the nice thing about these, the chapters in it are quite short. And the nice thing is that if you missed earlier chapters, it's easy to still understand the present chapter that we're going through. Okay, but you can also go back and read the earlier ones. Yeah. So the present chapter is one that Russell Coates, my co-author, wrote. He's a clinical psychologist at Eastern. And so some of the chapters he wrote, some of them I wrote. So this is one that he wrote. But what he talks about is something that is a very important quality of Buddhism, but he doesn't express it as Buddhism at all. So the chapter is called Imagery and Method Acting. Yeah, sounds like acting school or something. Cultivating our compassionate selves. So in it, he's talking about what we Buddhists often do, which is we imagine ourselves in situations, but acting in a different way than our usual habitual actions are. Yeah, or we imagine ourselves, being like a different person than we usually are. In other words, having qualities that maybe right now are still rather small inside of us, but we imagine having those qualities in a fully developed form, and then what it would be like to act in that way. Yeah, and the reason we do this is because so often our self-image keeps us down. You know, as long as we think, oh, I'm just little old me, I can't do this, then sure enough we can't. Or as long as we think, oh, I just have a bad temper, that's the way I am, then we're not even going to try to manage our anger in any reasonable way. Whereas if we can imagine being different, then we can start going in that direction and develop the qualities that we have right now inside that are still rather small. We can develop them in a big way. Okay, so here's what Russell's saying. So here I means Russell, okay, doesn't mean me. As I've mentioned, our mental state at any given time is a combination of different aspects of experience: attention, motivation, emotion, reasoning, and imagery. Yeah. So actually, any mental state we have there's many different mental factors going on. Yeah. And, you have to pay attention to something. You have a certain motivation. There may be an emotion acting on. You may have a story or some kind of reasoning lying upon what you're feeling. And you may also have certain images in your mind. Yeah. And so all of these together will form like one emotional state that spans a period of time. So these mental experiences influence one another. Where we place our attention impacts how we feel. Yeah, we know that, don't we? Anybody who has a baby knows that. Because all you do is change the baby's attention to a different, a crying baby. You change its attention to something else, and the baby's mood changes. Okay, and it works with us too. Yeah, if we pay attention to something else, our mood changes. If we make a big deal out of a small thing, our emotion intensifies. Okay, so where we place our attention impacts how we feel, which impacts our motivation and our reasoning. And so on. And so all these things kind of influence each other. There's something really marvelous about the interaction between these various aspects of our mental experience. It means we can use any of them as entry points as we work to develop our minds in different ways. So you saw at the beginning of the set, right before the talk started, we worked on the motivation part of our experience. Yeah, when we change our motivation, our whole attitude changes. Yeah, and we can see this so clearly in our own mind. When we have the motivation to retaliate for harm done, yeah, what's our mood? When we spend a minute and cultivate a good motivation of love and compassion for others, what's our mood then? Okay, so we can see this quite clearly, how motivation influences experience. Okay, so this opens up many new strategies for bringing compassion into our lives. For example, one powerful mental tool we'll be using throughout this book is imagery. Okay, so imagery sounds like, oh, we're just making up fantasy things, like I'm imagining being Peter Pan or something like that. Yeah, so it's not that. Yeah, actually, we're imagining things all the time. We just don't realize it. Yeah, we're actually imagining things all the time. Okay, when anybody here have anxiety? Yeah? When you're anxious, you are imagining something happening in the future that has not yet happened, that does not yet exist, that is nowhere around. But by the force of imagining it, then you feel anxious. Correct or incorrect? Yeah. If you look behind your anxiety, there's imagery going on. Oh, I'm going to this dinner tonight and I don't know anybody and I'm going to feel out of it. And you may not be aware of it, but there's an image of yourself walking into the room, everybody else talking to each other, and you standing there. Yeah? There's some kind of image like that. So we have imagery going on all the time. It's not something new and unusual. Okay? So what we're doing in Buddhism, which he's explaining in a secular way here, is we're just instead of letting the rampant negative imagery take over, we're deliberately steering our imagery to a positive view of ourselves and a positive view of the other people too. Okay. So in Buddhism, we talk a lot about visualization. You visualize the Buddha, for example. So this is what's happening. It's a psychological tool because we're imagining things anyway. You know? In the same way, in Buddhism, we recite mantras, little phrases in Sanskrit that are the expressions of a Buddha's realizations. And we recite those over and over and over again. And somebody might say, why are you saying just, oh, mani padme, oh, mani padme, oh, mani padme, oh, mani padme? Why don't you talk about something interesting instead of just saying the same thing over and over again like a broken record? Because it's not a broken record. These are the syllables said by the Buddha of compassion while he was in a deep state of meditation. Okay, but we have a conversation going on in ourselves all the time. Yeah. When you drive, if you drive to work or you drive to the store, you go from point A to point B. Yeah. When you get to point B, and you're the only person in the car and you have the radio off, if somebody says, "What did you think about on the whole trip?" Could you tell them? You just spent 45 minutes alone or half an hour alone. Yeah. Was your mind totally blank? I don't think so. There were thoughts going on. We were describing things to ourselves, all sorts of mental chatter. But we're so unaware of it that when we finally get to the store, we can't even remember what it was. So this tendency towards mental chatter is something that we have too. What saying mantra does is it takes that same tendency and flips it into something useful. Because when you say, Om Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum, there's a certain energy to that that helps your mind settle down and helps you to develop compassion. Yeah. So instead of just letting the mind chatter about, oh, okay, I'm driving the car, but I'm pulling out of the driveway, but there's my neighbor, and they put their garbage out in the place, on the street again, and it's the day early before the garbage collector comes, and their garbage always stinks. And why do they always do this? I really don't understand. And then then you're on to some other thing that links to that. Oh, my neighbor and their garbage. Well, where I work too, they have all this garbage. And speak of garbage, people don't even clean up around the coffee machine at work. They leave it for me to clean up all their garbage around the coffee machine. And I really think this is terribly unfair. Should I say something about it at work? I don't know, because if I say something, some people might get offended, but if I don't say anything, then I have to wind up cleaning around the coffee machine all day, and on and on and on and on, until you get to the store. There's this incredible stream of mental chatter, and we don't even realize it. Yeah? And so instead of letting the mind chatter like that, we make it a practice of saying, Om Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum. Or like you were chanting at the beginning of the session, Tayata Om Muni Muni Ma Muni Asoha, chanting that, something that settles our mind, makes us think of the Buddha's virtuous qualities, that can really, transform our mood and how we relate with people. Okay? So we're just using the things we do in Buddhism are taking things that we do in our ordinary life, and just flipping them so that we create virtue. Mm-hmm. Yeah, try being aware of what you think from point A to point B. Yeah? It's sometimes really shocking. Yeah? Okay. Since purposefully using imagery in this way may feel a bit foreign, it's useful to say a bit about it. Some people may initially feel silly conjuring up mental imagery and doubt it will have much effect. However, imagery is a very powerful tool for impacting our emotional states and developing compassion. Okay. Remember, our emotions aren't good at telling us the difference between things that are happening in the outside world and the thoughts, images, and fantasies we produce in our minds about them. That is a big point, okay? So usually we trust our emotions, yeah? And if we are angry, we trust that our anger is based on something reasonable. If we're attached to something and want it really bad, we assume that our attachment is based on something reasonable. However, in the first part of the book, we were talking about how often our emotions are not very reasonable in terms of how they respond to the outer world. Yeah? So we always think that what we're perceiving is actual direct objective information. Yeah. Actually, the direct information doesn't alone doesn't invoke emotions. What invokes the emotions is how we interpret that information. Yeah, what meaning we give to it. Okay, so it's I love telling the story about one of my friends who worked at NPR for a long time, and he was a journalist, and there was one other journalist in the office who never said hello to him. And they would pass in the office, and neither of them would say hello to each other. Okay? So, what's the data? This person walked by me. That's the data, the sense data. What did my friend do? He made a story about it. Oh, he walked by me and he didn't smile and he didn't say hello or good morning, and he never does that. He doesn't like me. Of course, they had never had any interaction, so there was no reason for that other person to dislike him. But my friend made up that story anyway. And because he made up that story, oh, this guy doesn't like me, then he continued to act towards that person as you would act towards somebody who doesn't like you. So he ignored him. Yeah. So, of course, when my friend ignores the other guy in the office, the other guy, of course, isn't going to say hello and good morning and how was your weekend. Okay. So, my friend's behavior, his emotion, his interpretation of the data kept this thing going for a really, really long time. Yeah. Until one day, the guy stopped him, when they were walking by each other in the office, and said, Peter, you just did this story, and it was a really excellent story, and many of your stories are really good. And Peter's like, huh? I thought you didn't like me. Okay? So when Russell says in here that our emotions are not good at separating out what happened on the outside in the world and what's going on inside here, that's a very good example. Because what's going on the outside, there was no hostility or ill will coming from the other person. The other person, it wasn't that he didn't like this guy. I mean, maybe he was shy or who knows, But by Peter's interpretation of the whole thing, he made a whole big deal out of it and then suffered until that one interaction when, that guy praised him. So, excellent example of here's the external situation and how we misinterpret it. Yeah, impute motivations to somebody, react emotionally to the story that we've projected onto the situation. And then, of course, how we act towards the other person based on our emotion continues to influence what happens between us. Okay? And you see this all the time. And yet we're certain that we perceive things objectively. Yeah. But we don't. Yeah. Or very seldom, put it that way. And I'm just talking in a conventional way. Yeah. So, Russell said, remember, our emotions aren't good at telling us the difference between things that are happening on the outside, in the outside world, and the thoughts, images, and fantasies we produce in our mind. In the same way, sometimes you meet somebody who is very physically attractive to you, and then pretty soon, your mind is, you've never said even hello to that person. But there you are, at some fancy hotel having dinner and lying on the beach, and you have a whole fantasy going on in your mind regarding this person who you've never even spoken to, but who you look at and they have a nice appearance. True or not true? It's true, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. We can keep ourselves angry for hours by playing an irritating scenario over and over in our minds. Anybody here ever done that? Yeah. But we can also use imagery in productive ways to create the motivations and emotions that we want to have. Okay? So some people may initially find imagery difficult because they are trying to see things with their mind's eye as clearly as if they were looking at them. And we're like this, I got to imagine this so clearly. Okay, it's not like that. Yeah. If I say, think of pizza. Do you have an image of pizza in your mind? Yeah. Even your eyes are open. Is it thin crust or a thick crust? Yeah. What's on the top? Yeah. Okay. So you see, right, I just say pizza, then there's this clear visualization of pizza. Okay? And then, of course, as soon as you visualize pizza, then you start saying, oh, I wonder what's for lunch. But this is a potluck. I don't know if anybody would bring pizza to a potluck. Oh, that's discouraging. But after we leave here, when we go down, we can hit Starbucks and then the pizza parlor. Yeah? Okay? And then actualize our visualization of pizza. Yeah? We just had a retreat here, a week-long retreat. There was one person, every day she brought up the idea of how we need an espresso machine here. Every day she was imagining her espresso that she couldn't get, So, okay. Okay. So seeing things this vividly isn't necessary. The key is to create mental experiences that can help us bring compassion into our minds. For example, imagine your favorite food. Notice the changes in your feelings and the mental state when you do this. Okay. Now, bring to mind a wise person who you respect and trust. Okay. Your mind changes by imagining them, doesn't it? Perhaps you feel safe or inspired by thinking of that person. This mental transformation is what we're trying to do with imagery. Okay. You think of, LeBron James, and you get one image. Okay. You think of, what's her name, Megan Rapinoe. Yeah. And what's the image that comes to mind? Like this. I get this one, you get that one. You know, I get this one with pink hair, you know? But, you think of Donald Trump, what image comes to your mind? Okay, you think of the Dalai Lama, what image comes to your mind? How do you feel? Okay. So if you spend all day thinking about Donald Trump, what happens if you spend all day thinking about the Dalai Lama? Yeah. What? Yeah. So, and this is all just imagery. What we choose to create in our mind, what we focus on. Okay. One way we can use imagery to develop compassion is by imagining what it would be like if we succeeded in becoming truly compassionate beings. Bring to mind the characteristics you imagine that you would have as a deeply compassionate being. Okay, so think of these: kindness, patience, wisdom, confidence, courage, distress tolerance, acceptance, creativity, and so on. Yeah. If you struggle to see yourself in this way, so just even hearing those words and thinking of what that quality would feel like inside, what it would feel like, for example, to have confidence and to have kindness. Just imagining that already has an effect on our mind. In the same way as if I say, imagine telling somebody off. That has an effect on your mind too, doesn't it? You can actually even feel it in some way in your gut, in your body as well. Mm-hmm. If you struggle to see yourself in this way as a deeply compassionate person, think of someone you see as a model of compassion and consider the qualities they possess which you would like to cultivate in yourself. Okay, so it's very helpful just to spend some time thinking of the qualities that we would like to develop in ourselves. Self-critical thoughts can get in the way of working to improve ourselves. For example, we may feel we are so far from the goal, saying to ourselves, I'm nothing like a deeply compassionate person. Okay? So we may feel so far from that goal, that we get demoralized and give up. Yeah, when we get demoralized and give up, what happens? We don't even try. When we don't try, what happens? We don't develop that quality. Okay? We can get so caught up in thinking about whether or not we have what it takes to develop these characteristics that we never actually try to cultivate them. Paul Gilbert, who is another psychologist that Russell works with, Paul Gilbert has developed an approach for getting out of this loop that is borrowed from method acting. And he has a footnote here. Footnote. Okay, so this method of cultivating compassion using imagery and method acting is a core component of compassion-focused therapy. Compassion-focused therapy treatment, and was developed by Paul Gilbert, and then it has Paul's books. Okay, so to be successful on stage or screen, actors often have to portray characters that are nothing like their real-life personalities. To do this convincingly, they have to get into the head of the character, to imagine how this character would feel, think, and react to the various situations they are presented with as the plot unfolds. This is what every actor or actress has to do, is completely put themselves into the character's mind. Method actors approach this task by imagining that they are these characters, by considering the character's psychological motives, and imagining they actually have the traits of the characters they are seeking to portray. These exercises are also reminiscent of mind training practices used by Buddhists for centuries. In such practices, the student visualizes herself as a being who embodies the qualities she wishes to cultivate in herself and imagines acting with those qualities throughout the day. When I was in high school, remember the play Our Town? Everybody, I think, almost everybody read it in high school. So I played Emily. So I really identified with Emily. She and I were really close. And I thought about her a lot, because I was going through those same kind of existential things that the play was expressing. And I remember waking up one morning and thinking, am I Emily? Yeah, that's how much it was close. So I decided I wasn't, but good thing. But I still had many of those same existential things that the play was expressing. So, when you're acting, you do that. And then, like he mentioned here, in the mind training practices that we do in Buddhism, we imagine acting in a completely different way. Yeah, we imagine being a compassionate person or a kind person or whatever it is. And so if we were a compassionate person, instead of looking at this situation with critical eyes, wanting to compete with other people and make it so that they're inferior and we're superior, a compassionate person will look at the situation and rejoice at somebody else's good qualities and accomplishments. And so we practice, thinking, okay, I'm going to be that compassionate person and look at that person's qualities and accomplishments and really rejoice and feel very, very glad about it. Yeah. And then you can really see the difference between that feeling inside yourself and when you're competing and you want to put the other person down. And sometimes our competition is so strong that it's really hard to rejoice at somebody else's success. It's like pulling teeth. But the thing is, like in acting, how you rehearse your part again and again and again, in your meditation, when you're trying on these different ways of thinking, you think about it again and again and again. You do the meditation multiple times, and you practice thinking in those situations and imagining situations where you can quell your competitiveness in favor of rejoicing. Okay? So it gives you something to work at, but it requires practice. We can apply this approach as we work to develop the qualities of the compassionate self. In doing this, we imagine what it would be like if we did have these compassionate characteristics, picturing ourselves having these qualities. We imagine how we would think, feel, and act as we manifest these qualities in our daily lives. Doing this, we create and gradually strengthen patterns of activity in our brains that help us to bring these qualities into our lives and to establish them as mental habits. So I guess you grease certain neural pathways as well. Professionals in many different fields use strategies like this. Athletes go through the game in their heads, picturing how to respond in various situations. Yeah? I mean, that's what they do. If you're an athlete, you imagine the different move. If you're playing in a game, you imagine the different moves that the other team can make and how you would respond. If you're in something where you're just competing against yourself, like high jumping or whatever, you imagine yourself somehow going over that bar. Yeah. So guitar players run through the scales and progressions in their minds. Similarly, imagining ourselves feeling, thinking, and acting with compassion can prepare us to bring these qualities into the reality of our daily lives. It helps to imagine ourselves enacting these qualities in specific life situations. Imagining our compassionate selves in action can keep this from being a vague, purely mental experience and helping us to bring these qualities into our lives. Okay? So, if you have problem with road rage, anybody get upset when somebody cuts them off on the highway? This one is hard for people to admit. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah, then you speed up. You cut in front of them and you go slow. Yeah. Give them a taste of their own medicine. Yeah. Okay. So, if you suffer from road rage and you want to retaliate, imagine, in your meditation, somebody cutting you off, and you're just saying, please go ahead. Yeah. My getting there 1 minute earlier does not matter. Preventing an accident is important. That person is not disrespecting me by cutting me off. They may have an emergency or they have to get somewhere, or they may just have been careless, as I have been when I've cut people off by accident. You have to admit that to yourself. But you just, imagine somebody cuts you off and you just say, that's fine. Yeah. Or you're in a traffic jam and somebody wants to change lanes and come in front of you, and your mind goes, I don't want to let them in, as if that 10 feet is really important, because by giving up 10 feet, you're going to arrive at your destination 4 hours later. Yeah? And just, imagine thinking, okay, somebody wants to change lanes in the traffic jam. That's fine. Please come. Yeah? And having a peaceful mind and thinking of how relaxed and happy that other person is when they can change lanes. Just like when you want to change lanes in a traffic jam, how good you feel when somebody else lets you in. Okay? So it's a thing of just imagining how you would be responding in a different way. Yeah? Try it. Yeah, I can see a few people in the audience kind of going like this. Okay. So Russell says, we can call this the compassionate self exercise. So here he goes. Start by considering one or more compassionate qualities that you'd like to develop in yourself. Okay, warmth, kindness, acceptance and non-judgment, confidence, courage, patience, humility, distress tolerance, humor, generosity, loving kindness. Think about the qualities you've chosen, becoming familiar with them. Now imagine you already have these qualities. So imagine how it feels to have these qualities. What would it feel like to have patience, deep kindness, confidence, or generosity? If your internal self-critic begins to argue with you, remind yourself that you're just imagining what it would be like, and gently redirect your mind from the critical thought, bringing it back to the quality you're cultivating. Having these compassionate qualities, what would you be motivated to do? As these virtues work themselves through you, what desires and intentions would arise in you? Consider your thinking. If you had deep kindness, wisdom, and confidence, what thoughts would you think? Being kind and patient, how would you understand your own struggles or those of others? How would you spend your time, and what sorts of things would you do? How would this compassionate perspective change the way you engage in your everyday activities? Allowing your mouth to take on a gentle smile, picture yourself as a compassionate person who possesses the qualities you've chosen. Consider how you would look as this compassionate person. And consider how your voice would sound. Picture yourself going through the world, acting with these positive qualities. Imagine yourself interacting kindly and compassionately with others, applying these qualities to specific situations and interactions in your life. As we do this, we also practice compassion with ourselves, being patient with ourselves as we learn to imagine ourselves in this way. Some people report that while they can imagine how they might think or act if they had these qualities, they don't feel it in the beginning. Our emotions are very sensitive to imagery, so if we continue to picture ourselves thinking and behaving compassionately, helping others who are suffering, directing kindness to others, having confidence and wisdom in the face of difficulty, this imagery will come to impact our emotional state in the same way as other mental images. Okay, so just as like when you go to a movie and you watch the characters on the screen, if you identify with them, what's going on in the movie influences you emotionally, and you may come out of the theater wanting to do a certain thing or not wanting to do something. So in the same way, this kind of imagery, imagining ourselves in this way, impacts our emotional state. Just as imagining ourselves in an angry scenario can produce feelings of anger in us, imagining ourselves behaving compassionately can help bring up kind, compassionate emotions. Yeah, so really try that. Experiment with that in your lives. You know, it works. As with all skills, using imagery in this way becomes easier and more effective with practice. So we need to keep it up in order to get the results that we want. Okay? And then he has a reflection at the end. Actually, that whole chapter is like a reflection. We went through it rather quickly. So, you know, I would recommend going home and really going through all those different things and spending some time with each one and imagining it. At least once a day, bring to mind a compassionate quality you'd like to develop in yourself. Imagining you already have that quality, picture yourself enacting it in your life. Imagine how your motivation, emotions, reasoning, behavior, and interactions are shaped by this quality. As you end the exercise, try to bring this quality with you as you go about your daily life. Okay. So each chapter has a reflection to do at the end. That was the one for this chapter. Okay. So we have time for a couple of questions or comments.
I was really inspired by yesterday's winner of the Wimbledon tennis, the lady from Romania, in her comments, giving thanks after her success. She refers to a coach that she hasn't had her as a coach for the last 2 years. And this coach dismissed himself from her. And you could call it tough love or compassion. But his motivation for dismissing himself was that he could not coach her beyond her beating herself up mentally. And so she acknowledges him 2 times in her
Wow.
giving thanks for why she was there in that position. So but the whole thing was that he dismissed himself because he couldn't stop her from changing her imagery.
Yeah. And how, by doing that, he invigorated her to really change.
To do it,
Yeah.
yes. It was very inspiring.
Yeah.
Relative to this.
Yeah. She probably initially felt when he resigned, like, oh, I'm being abandoned. But then she stepped up to the plate.